Hi, everyone. I am Beverly Roberts, Director of the Mainstreaming Medical Care Program at the ARC of New Jersey. The Mainstreaming Medical Care Program promotes quality health and mental health care for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities throughout New Jersey. I am delighted to welcome you all to a webinar titled Your Right to Appeal a Medicaid Termination. The speakers are Michael Brower and Kelly McGuire from Disability Rights New Jersey. I will introduce them in just a minute after a few housekeeping details. The speakers will answer as many of your questions as possible after their slide presentation is finished. To submit a question at any time during this webinar, please type it into the question box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen in the GoToWebinar control panel. If you lose connectivity during the webinar, please log back in. If you are having other difficulties, just click on the Help menu at the top of the GoToWebinar control panel. This webinar is being recorded. The slides and the recording will be posted later this week on my website, www.mainstreamingmedicalcare.org, and also on the ARC of New Jersey Family Institute website. I will now provide a very brief introduction for our speakers. More detailed information was provided on them in the announcement of this webinar. Michael Brower serves as the legal director at Disability Rights New Jersey, the private nonprofit agency designated as the protection and advocacy system for people with disabilities in the state of New Jersey. He has worked as an attorney there since 2016 and has represented clients and worked on systemic issues affecting individuals with IDD, brain injuries, physical disabilities, and mental health conditions. Also presenting today is Kelly McGuire. She's a staff attorney at DRNJ, representing adults with various disabilities who live in the community. She previously worked at DRNJ as a student intern. It is my great pleasure to welcome Michael Brower and Kelly McGuire for their presentation titled Your Right to Appeal a Medicaid Termination. Take it away, Michael and Kelly.
Great. Thank you so much, Bev. We appreciate the introduction and the opportunity to come and present. And for the audience who's turned up, we think this is a very important topic and a very timely topic. And we hope that everybody has also watched Bev's webinar leading up to this regarding the Medicaid redetermination process. Before we get into the meat, I do just want to introduce, in case some folks are not familiar, my agency, Disability Rights New Jersey. As Bev mentioned, we are the designated protection advocacy system for New Jersey. If you've never heard of us before, it's important to take a couple of things away. First, we are a private nonprofit. We used to be part of state government, but since 1994, we've spun out of state government to act independently as a private nonprofit. We are supported by federal grants, private donations, and occasionally foundation and mission-specific grants. Protection and advocacy system, just to understand what that means, we have two roles. One is protection. It's in the title. That means we investigate independently for abuse or neglect committed against people with disabilities in any kind of a setting. That gives us authority to go unaccompanied and unannounced to any setting that serves people with disabilities. And conduct investigations to basically shine light on bad conditions. The other role we have is the advocacy role, and that's where Kelly and I sit in the agency. The advocacy role is essentially a nonprofit law firm. We represent individual clients with disabilities to help them address legal issues within our priority. And we also address systemic issues where we don't necessarily work on behalf of any individual or single client, but we try to address big systems problems that prevent people with disabilities from living as fully integrated members of society. As part of the advocacy mission, we do outreaches, educations, and trainings. That's what we're doing here today, to try to educate people in the community about their rights, whether you're a person with a disability yourself, a family member, a caregiver, a service provider, or an advocate in the space. We hope that you'll take something away from this that's helpful. And with that, I'm going to move along because we have a jam-packed agenda today. So I want to move into the meat. This is us. We're not on screen today. I'm Michael Brower, currently speaking. I am a white man. I'm dark, short hair. It's not as long as it was in that picture. I wear glasses. And Kelly, I want to pass the mic to you for just a second so you can introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm like Bev and Michael said, I'm Kelly McGuire. I'm a staff attorney with Disability Rights New Jersey. I'm a white woman with blonde hair, and I look pretty similar to the outfit that I'm wearing in that picture because it is what I'm wearing. So I'm not on camera, but that's what I look like, and I'm happy to be talking to you guys this morning.
All right, great. Thank you, Kelly. Now let's give a little bit of a roadmap and look ahead at what we're going to cover in the next 54 minutes or so. We're going to be talking about the steps that you can take as a Medicaid beneficiary to stop or at least pause a Medicaid eligibility termination so that you can keep your benefits without interruption if you believe they've been wrongfully terminated. I want to talk for a second about why this matters as we go into this roadmap, but some of the specific skills that you should walk away from our webinar this morning or this afternoon will be making sure that you get your mail from Medicaid, some instructions on what to look for, some immediate action that you can take if you receive a termination notice about your Medicaid eligibility. We can talk about how to get to a fair hearing and how to appeal, and how to make sure that your benefits continue during the pendency of an appeal. We'll give you a little bit of heads up about what to expect from the fair hearing process, what to do if you're no longer eligible, and what's important along all of these steps is where you can look for help, legal assistance, if you find yourself either with questions, concerns, or a termination letter in your mailbox. If for some folks who find themselves no longer eligible for Medicaid, we'll give some tips about what you might look to as alternatives. In this community, though, we're talking in concert with the ARC of New Jersey. A lot of people in the audience are either people with IDD, family members, advocates who work with people with developmental disabilities. All of this matters because without Medicaid eligibility, you cannot receive Medicaid services. And the way that New Jersey's structure is set up right now, if you receive DDD services, either on the supports program or in the community care program, you need Medicaid to continue receiving those services. There are some very short-term stopgaps available if there's a hiccup, but you do not want to let Medicaid eligibility lapse if you count on things like residential group home placements, in-home supports, self-directed employees, behavioral services that are paid through Medicaid. Basically, if you work with a support coordinator to access Medicaid services, you want to make sure that that Medicaid eligibility continues so that those services are not interrupted. And all of the skills that we're going to talk about go to that point. What do you need to do to stop those services from being interrupted should you receive a termination letter?
All right, so just to start us off in terms of a little bit of background information, we're going to touch briefly on what the public health emergency is, talk about the eligibility unwinding process, and what the eligibility criteria is to maintain your Medicaid. Michael, could you go to the next slide? The first thing that you need to do to prepare for this unwinding process is to make sure that Medicaid has your address. They have already started to mail out some materials, and it's very important that you return them timely. So Medicaid needs to have your current mailing address in order to reach you. And if Medicaid does not have your mailing address, if you've moved in the past couple of years, please update your mailing address with Medicaid. The phone number on the screen is 1-800-701-0710. Just call them, update your address so that you can get your mail and that you can return that in a timely fashion. That's one of the most important things that you can do to prepare for this process. Okay, next slide. Okay, so during the public health emergency, people's Medicaid coverage was not being terminated even if they no longer qualified for Medicaid coverage. So for the past 3 years, no one's been kicked off of Medicaid. And as of April 1st, 2023, New Jersey Family Care is going to start redetermining members' eligibility. So every single person enrolled in an NJ Family Care program is going to be reviewed to see if you still qualify for coverage. It's important to note that this dam is not going to break in April. Medicaid is doing their best to break this down into chunks, so not everybody is going to be redetermined for eligibility all at once. This process is going to unfold over the next 12 months, starting on April 1st. But like I mentioned in the last slide, the most important thing you can do at this point is to make sure that Medicaid has your address so that any materials that they need to mail to you, you can receive and return in a timely fashion. Okay, next slide. So a little bit about the eligibility unwinding process. Like I mentioned, New Jersey Family Care has already started sending out renewal packets to Medicaid members. So if you receive one of these packets, you have to fill it out and respond even if nothing has changed to avoid potential disenrollment. Before terminating your Medicaid coverage, Medicaid is supposed to be reviewing whether you're eligible for Medicaid through any other door. In a couple slides, Michael is going to go over a little bit about what those doors are and what they mean. But essentially, you may know that there are a bunch of different ways to become eligible for Medicaid, different Medicaid programs. And if you were originally on SSI-related Medicaid, but now you're working and you've lost your SSI benefits, Medicaid should still be reviewing your other eligibility options, like New Jersey's workability program, before they terminate your coverage. So this is one area where we are trying to become prepared for Medicaid to potentially erroneously send out some termination notices if they're not adequately assessing eligibility for different doors, which is why it's very important that you complete your eligibility packet when you receive it so that you can maintain your coverage. Next slide. So what can you do to prepare? April 1st is right around the corner, and you should have, Medicaid should have already been sending out these eligibility packets. And like I mentioned, and I will continue to stress this, the most important thing you can do is call the number 1-800-701-0710 to update your contact information. And this is most important if you've moved in the last 3 years, but it does not hurt to give them a ring and let them know your current mailing address so that you can receive whatever they need to send you promptly and return it. Also, keep an eye on your mailboxes for any mail from the state of New Jersey or your specific county, and make sure that you're replying on time to the mailings to avoid a gap in your coverage. The notices, we're going to show you some examples in this presentation today so that you know what to look for, but we are not 100% sure what they're going to look for or who they're going to be coming from. It could say NJ Family Care, it could be coming from the state of New Jersey, or it could be coming from the county. So make sure you're checking your mail and reviewing it carefully so that you don't miss anything from Medicaid. Next slide.
All right, Kelly, I think that you've hit the most important thing already. If anybody takes one thing away from this webinar, that's what they should be doing, is double checking to make sure that Medicaid has updated addresses if you're a Medicaid beneficiary, and even more important, if you've moved. Kelly mentioned the eligibility doors for Medicaid, and a lot of folks don't know this. They assume that there's only one way to be Medicaid for eligible, and it's whatever way they first became eligible, whether it was last year, 10 years ago, or 30 years ago. The most important thing is that there's a federal law that says if you've become eligible for the door that you first went in through, you can still maintain your eligibility through a different door. And the obligation to figure out which doors you might be eligible for, that obligation lies with the state Medicaid agency. We talk a little bit interchangeably, and I think it's worth making sure that we're all clear about that. We talk about things like New Jersey Family Care, the state Medicaid agency, or sometimes even the Division of Medical Assistance and Health Services. They're all the same thing. That's, we're talking about one agency within the state government, the Division of Medical Assistance and Health Services, that runs our Medicaid program. They put a label on it called New Jersey Family Care. That's just a brand name basically for our state's Medicaid program. For those who are advocates, attorneys, or just very interested in understanding where these rights come from, I put a few citations on the screen here if you want to go and look up where this information or where these legal requirements come from. Though we don't have time to dive into a legal analysis, and this is not a presentation for lawyers, that being said, sometimes it's very important. The bottom line, literally, is that the Medicaid agency has an obligation to make sure that if somebody loses eligibility under one door, but could be eligible under another, that they make a transition for that person with no gap in coverage. All right, so up on the screen, we have a graphic with the New Jersey Family Care I mentioned just a second ago. That's a brand name. That is what New Jersey's state government has labeled our Medicaid system here in New Jersey. There's a couple of different ways that you can get in to the New Jersey Family Care system. And for the most part, it doesn't really matter which door you go into, especially if you are a DDD beneficiary and you are enrolled in one of the waiver programs, supports program, or community care. If you receive supplemental security income, or SSI, you automatically get Medicaid with that. And you're eligible for Medicaid, you come in that first green door. If you are somebody who enrolled through your local county Board of Social Services in the aged, blind, or disabled Medicaid program, commonly called ABD, you're eligible for Medicaid. You walk in the front door, you are just as eligible as somebody who gets SSI. In the mid-2010s, with the passage of Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act, there was an expansion group based on people who have incomes up to 138% of the federal poverty level. If you receive Medicaid through Obamacare or through the Affordable Care Act, two different names for the same thing, you get Medicaid. You're in the door, you're where you need to be to keep your services. If you're enrolled through Workability, a program designed specifically for people with disabilities who earn an income to allow them to earn wages and save resources, you're eligible for Medicaid. If you went in through the DDD Waiver Supports Unit, which is a special program just for people with developmental disabilities who are on the waiver programs, it has a higher income and resource limits than some of the other programs, then you have Medicaid and you're good to go, right? These are the doors that you need to be in order to keep your Medicaid eligibility. And if you have switched between any of those doors, Kelly mentioned losing your SSI, maybe because you started working as an example, you might be able to transition from the SSI door to the Workability door and keep your Medicaid eligibility without any interruption in the payment for services through DDD, health insurance, prescriptions, hospital coverage, right? All the benefits that come with being a Medicaid beneficiary. The only door that's an exception is my very last door on the right, called Medicare Savings Programs. These are programs for people who are on Medicare, but who might not be financially eligible for Medicaid. Maybe they have slightly too many resources, too much money in the bank, or maybe they have slightly too high of an income, or maybe they just don't fit the other criteria for the other eligibility doors. A Medicare Savings Program helps pay for the expenses of Medicare, things like co-pays or co-insurance, reducing the premiums. And this is technically a Medicaid program, but if you have only a Medicare Savings Program and no other eligibility, you do not get full Medicaid, and that would not be enough to keep services through the DDD waiver programs. There's a lot of details on the financial criteria, not really within the scope of this webinar to talk about those, but you should just know this concept. If you lose eligibility under one door, that does not mean that you automatically lose your Medicaid coverage. There should be a complete check at the obligation of the state to make sure that you don't fit into any other door before they even send you a termination notice. Our concern is that because there are 2.2 million Medicaid beneficiaries in the state of New Jersey, that mistakes might happen and people might slip through the cracks. The point of this webinar is that if you are a person who wants to keep your Medicaid eligibility, or you're working with somebody who wants to keep their Medicaid eligibility, and you think you slipped through the cracks, you should know that all is not lost just because you got a termination notice. It's worth checking to see, do I fit into any of these other doors? How are you going to know if you slip through the cracks? Well, you're going to get some mail. This is why it's so important to make sure that your address is up to date, because if your address is wrong, if you've moved and nobody at the state Medicaid office has received a report from you that your address has changed, that mail might go to your old place and you might not see it. And if you don't see it, you're not going to get this very important notice that's up here on the screen right now. This is called a Medicaid notice. This one in particular is a notice of denial. A notice of termination looks almost the same. This is one big caveat. These notices that we have, because these terminations haven't happened since before the pandemic in 2020, the information we have is old, and we haven't seen what the new templates are going to look like, but we assume they're going to look pretty much like they looked before the pandemic. This one is dated. You'll see there's a big red arrow, February 11th, 2020. So just before the pandemic really hit us hard in New Jersey. That date is a very, very important bit of information. And if you receive a Medicaid termination notice, you want to look at first, what is the date on the notice? That date on the notice will determine how much time you have to take action. The other arrow, I'm going to do a little bit of a preview with my second arrow, the one near the bottom of the screen, that's pointing at a little checkbox. And that checkbox says you would like to continue your Medicaid benefits during a fair hearing process. That's the second place that my eyeballs always go when I see a notice. If you get one of these and you think it's wrong, you want to keep your Medicaid benefits, and you need to keep your Medicaid benefits, you need to check a box that says you want to continue those Medicaid benefits and then send the form back in. We're going to talk a little bit more detail about how you go about doing that, but those are the two places that your eyeball should go to first. The first page also talks about why you received this termination notice. It says whether you were financially ineligible or clinically ineligible. Maybe the state no longer thinks you have a particular type of disability, or your condition has changed, or maybe you've accumulated too much money in the bank, or maybe your income has gone too high. These are the places to look at a notice. The main point of this slide, though, is that you should be opening your mail and looking for something that looks like this, right? It has a seal of the state of New Jersey or your county board of social services right at the top. This is a notice. This means you have to pay attention. This is another example of a notice. I mentioned that some might come from county boards of social services. This one came from Somerset County, just an example. So it looks a little different, but overall it looks the same, right? There's a date, my first red arrow. This one was sent February 24th, 2023. This is actually a little bit curious because somebody jumped the gun, sent something out early. It has an explanation. And again, this one's a little bit of a curious example because it says this person's Medicaid eligibility will continue. But you're going to see it has the same checkbox. My second red arrow, I wish to continue my Medicaid benefits, or I do not wish to continue my Medicaid benefits. As we talk about how to appeal, it's important that if you want to keep your Medicaid benefits, you check that box to affirmatively ask to keep your Medicaid benefits during the pendency of an appeal.
Okay, so what should you do if you receive one of these notices that your Medicaid coverage is being terminated? This is an important thing to take away from this presentation as well. What you should do is immediately request a fair hearing. There's a short window of time in which you can do that. They will allow you to request a Medicaid fair hearing within 20 days of the date on your denial or your termination notice. However, you have to request it within 10 days in order to ensure that your benefits will continue during the fair hearing process. That's an important thing to note, and we're going to stress that several times through this presentation, but that timeline is very important. So make sure you're opening your mail in a timely fashion and reading it, making sure that you can identify these denial notices. These slides are part of the handouts for the material today, so take a look over those letters that Michael just showed you so that you can recognize what that's going to look like when you get it in the mail. And then follow the procedure that's described in the letter. If you read it carefully, like Michael pointed out, it describes to you how to request a fair hearing, where to send that request to, and what you need to say to request it. And we're going to cover that a little bit more in greater detail. And another thing that you should do is contact an attorney. We're gonna mention the contact information for 3 organizations in New Jersey that can help you with this. One of them is our agency, Disability Rights New Jersey, as well as Legal Services of New Jersey and the Community Health Law Project. Medicaid has advised us that they are trying to be responsive and understanding during this process, and they're hoping to resolve the improper denials quickly without going through the full fair hearing process. So we're hoping that this isn't going to be, the floodgates are opening and everybody's being denied and everybody has to go through a fair hearing. But you need to request the fair hearing so that you have that door open to you and so that your benefits continue. When you contact an attorney, they can help make sure that you are filling that form out correctly to ensure that your benefits will continue. The attorney can help you fix the mistake if you are improperly denied, and help explain to Medicaid that you might fit into another one of those doors that Michael explained. So if you get a Medicaid termination letter, request your fair hearing, keep an eye on the timeline, and contact an attorney to assist you through the process. Next slide.
And I want to interject one thing here, Kelly, because I've seen this happen before. That deadline is very short, especially with the way that the mail works in 2023. It's not the same as it was before the pandemic. The 10-day deadline and the 20-day deadline, 10 days is the range that you're guaranteed to keep your benefits if you check that box and request a fair hearing. 20 days is the window that you can request a fair hearing in. In practice, most of the time, if you ask within 20 days, you can also keep your benefits, but the law says 10. You want to stick to the 10 days. Those deadlines start ticking from the date the notice was sent to you. Oftentimes, the only way you can prove when something was sent is to look at the date at the top of the notice, that first red arrow I showed everybody, right at the top. You don't want to wait to talk with an attorney if you're going to request a fair hearing. By the time you reach out to an intake office, get connected with a lawyer, get a call back, find some time to actually talk to them, you might be at the end of that 10 days already, and it might be too late. Don't wait. It's easy enough for them. We're going to give you some instructions in just a second. I'm going to pass the microphone back to Kelly so she can tell you how to actually request that fair hearing on your own, even before you get on the phone with a lawyer. And go ahead, Kelly. Sorry about that interjection.
Nope, that's okay. Appreciate it. But to the point of how to request a Medicaid fair hearing, your denial notice will explain how to properly request a fair hearing. In those denial notices that Michael showed you, again, it shows you the address to send it to. There's a box that you need to check that says, I wish to continue my Medicaid benefits. You can explain why you want a fair hearing. You have to provide them with your name, your address, and your phone number. We have also included in the materials for today a fair hearing request form so that you can fill that out and submit it if you are, for some reason, informed by Medicaid by phone or some other means that your coverage is being denied and you have not received a denial letter, or if for some reason you don't have your denial letter, you can send that form. But it's important that if you receive a denial letter that you retain a copy of it, and also that you send a copy of it with your fair hearing request. We've seen people request fair hearings, and Medicaid has come back and said that the request was improper because they did not provide the complete denial letter with the request. So keep a copy and send a copy. Also, it's very, very important that you keep proof that you sent the request, because as we mentioned, the timeline is so short and it's so important to continue your benefits. The best way to request a fair hearing is to do so by fax, so that you will have a fax confirmation when you send it. It would also work to send it by certified mail. You get a certified mail receipt, but we recommend that you do a fax if possible, if you have access to fax, or you can borrow a friend's fax machine or use the libraries. The mailing address and fax number are on this slide as well. If you choose to mail it, you mail it to the state of New Jersey, the Division of Medical Assistance and Health Services, Fair Hearing Unit. That's in P.O. Box 712 in Trenton, New Jersey. Or you can fax it to the DMOS Fair Hearing Unit at 609-588-2435. Again, you have to do this within 20 days. 10 days to ensure that your benefits will continue. And there is clear instructions if you carefully read the denial notice that you receive from Medicaid, termination notice. And there's also instructions included in the handout that we provided in the materials. Next slide. So once again, you must submit that written request to the Division of Medical Assistance and Health Services within 20 calendar days of the date on your notice. You have to submit the request in writing. You can't call Medicaid or talk to someone in person and say, hey, I want to appeal this. It has to be in writing, and you need to retain a copy of your request so that you can prove that you submitted it in a timely fashion. The written request doesn't need to be in any particular format, but it should be a clear expression of your desire to present, of the opportunity to present your case to a higher authority. And the form that's provided in the denial letters is adequate to meet that standard, as is the form letter that's provided in the materials. Again, it's not complicated. You don't need to write an essay, and you don't need to provide them all of the information about why you're eligible. You just need to clearly communicate, hey, I don't agree with this termination notice. I'm still eligible for Medicaid. I want my benefits to continue. This is how you contact me, and let's get this ball rolling. So like I said, your notice will include a written form that you can use. And if for some reason you're denied and you don't have a written form, the form that's provided in your materials today will also serve to meet that standard. Finally, I know I've said this many times and I will continue to say it, you must request it within 10 days if you want your benefits to continue during the proceedings. And after you submit, this is kind of a side note, just a preview of the process when you do submit your request for a fair hearing. You submit it within 10 days so that you ensure that your benefits will continue to DMAS. And then DMAS will submit your request for fair hearing to the Office of Administrative Law within 20 days of their receipt. Then the Office of Administrative Law will schedule the fair hearing, and they will be in contact with you about the process. But for your purposes, what you need to know is how to send that notice of your request for a fair hearing within 10 days to DMAS. Next slide. So on your screen now, you can see the Medicaid fair hearing request form that I have been talking about. On the left is the fair hearing notice that is included in the denial letter. This explains you have the right to a fair hearing. You have to request it within 20 days. If you want your benefits to continue, you should request within 20 days. It also says that if a fair hearing decision is not in your favor, you may be required to repay Medicaid benefits to which you were not entitled. Don't overthink that. Don't panic if you see that. In practice, we've never seen Medicaid come back and say, you need to pay us for those benefits. It's just included there, just in case they decide to someday do that. So again, here at the bottom on the right, on the left, you will see the fair hearing request. It's already filled in with the mailing address and the fax number. You fill in why you need why you are requesting a fair hearing. And this is very simple. You don't need to go into any great detail here. You just say, I'm requesting a fair hearing because I do not agree with the decision to terminate my Medicaid coverage. I believe I am still eligible for Medicaid. And then look at these big red arrows. They're very helpful. They point you in the direction of the continue my Medicaid benefits box. Check that box so that your Medicaid can continue. Then just fill in your contact information and fax this or send it by certified mail to the Division of Medical Assistance and Health Services. On the right is a screenshot of the Medicaid fair hearing request form that we provided in your materials. It essentially has all of the same information as the one that comes from Medicaid. But again, we're just providing that in case you don't have this form and you want to request a fair hearing because you believe your Medicaid is denied. Simple enough, your phone, your name, the date. We also included how you received the termination notice. and when you've received the termination notice, because again, the date is very important. And then it includes that brief statement that you'd like to request the Medicaid fair hearing because you still believe that you're eligible. The box to check if you'd like your benefits to continue. So fill this form out and fax it or mail it to DMAS to request your fair hearing. 20 days is the deadline, 10 days for a continuation of benefits. Next slide.
So thank you for that, Kelly. Those are the essentials of what you need to do to request a continuation of benefits and a Medicaid fair hearing. Cannot emphasize enough. There's all capitals on the screen. Warning. You can lose your services during the appeal if you don't ask for continuation or if you miss the deadline. That can be very problematic if you live in, say, a DDD group home and you want to appeal and the state just made a mistake, but you missed that deadline to appeal. If your Medicaid stops, a Medicaid fair hearing, going to the Office of Administrative Law, by the time an administrative law judge schedules a hearing, gets the parties into the courtroom, issues a decision, sends that decision back to the Medicaid director to be approved, that process can take months, if not longer. And if in the meantime you don't have your Medicaid coverage, you might be having a very difficult time just maintaining yourself, let alone going through the appeal process. So that's why it's so important. And we keep saying it, we feel like a broken record, but it really is that important that you send in a fair hearing request and check the box for continuation of benefits as soon as you possibly can. If you can do it in the 10-day window, do it. If you can send it by fax so that the notice, the request gets to the Division of Medical Assistance the same day, send it by fax. If you have to send a letter, make sure you've got something that you can prove when you put it in the mail. Just because it's so important for people to keep benefits. Even though we're emphasizing all of that, I also want to make sure that you're not panicking if, say, come the end of April, you haven't received any of this mail that we're talking about. Because like Kelly mentioned at the top, they're not blowing up the dam right away. It's not going to be a flood of everybody who's on Medicaid gets reviewed in April. In fact, the state has a very specific plan to break everybody up into 1/12, right? 1/12 of the people in the state get reviewed every month. This has actually been going on during the pandemic, except during the pandemic, nobody was getting terminated if you didn't meet the eligibility criteria. Now, these notices might just have teeth. That's why we're saying this here. I mentioned just a second ago that this process might take months, which is why it's so important to make sure you keep your benefits so that if it does take several months to get something ironed out, you don't lose your services, right? You can still go to a doctor or the hospital, get your prescriptions covered by Medicaid, maintain your waiver services like individual supports or group homes, therapies, you name it. You want to be able to keep all of those things so that you're in a good place to actually fix the problem. This is a little bit of a timeline of what it looks like. Kelly talked about the first stages, right? You have 20 days to request an appeal. If you request an appeal within 10 days and check the box, you're guaranteed to keep your benefits. If you check that box within 20 days, you're probably going to keep your benefits. Most of the time, the state will give you that courtesy, but they're really only required in the first 10. That gets transmitted with your request, gets transmitted to the Office of Administrative Law, where an administrative law judge brings the parties before them, listens to the arguments. Are you eligible? Are you not eligible? What are your finances? What clinical situation has changed? Hears from the state why they thought you weren't eligible for Medicaid anymore. That judge issues an initial decision. It's not binding yet. A judge has to send it to the Division of Medical Assistance and Health Services to the director. And the director's job is to uphold or reverse or modify that judge's decision. They've got 45 days at the director's office to make that final agency decision. So already, right, we're 2-3 months out from the time you first would have requested an appeal. You really want to make sure that you keep your Medicaid benefits for that period of time. If that final agency decision comes out against you and you still disagree and Medicaid makes a final decision that you're still not eligible, you can go to the Superior Court's Appellate Division within 45 days of receiving the final agency decision. I tell you this only because it exists. Going to the Appellate Division without an attorney is a very, very difficult thing to do. It's allowed, the court rules contemplate it, You can go without a lawyer, but if you step into the appellate division without one, the procedures are complex, the deadlines are not necessarily crystal clear. There's not very much help you could expect to get from the court going through the appeal, and the standards of review, basically what you can ask the court to even look at once you get to the appellate division, becomes very narrow and very technical. I would not recommend doing that without the help of a lawyer. At any step along this process, if you received a termination notice and it turns out you were very clearly eligible for Medicaid under one of those other doors, communicating that kind of a message to Medicaid, they've been very clear to us in the run-up to this process that they want to solve problems. They don't want to go to fair hearings unnecessarily. So if you can show Medicaid, look, I'm actually eligible. I used to have SSI. I went to work during the pandemic, but now I'm eligible for Medicaid through workability. Look, here's all my pay stubs. I clearly meet all the criteria. Medicaid has told us they want to work those cases out and solve them without making everybody go to a hearing. Doing that on your own can be tricky. You'll receive contact information and you have it already for the Division of Medical Assistance. But actually communicating with them without a lawyer can be difficult. But if you have a lawyer, working with one to help solve that problem for you might be one of the quickest ways to get back to the zone of comfort where your Medicaid eligibility is clear, your services resume, and there's no pending hearing, that you're back into the place where you know your eligibility is secure. On that note, Kelly mentioned this a little bit at the top, Kelly and I work for Disability Rights New Jersey. We can tell you that we're prepared to take Medicaid cases on if individuals receive a termination notice and they are a person with a disability and they receive community-based services, whether that's through DDD, maybe it's because they're in a TBI program, receiving traumatic brain injury services, or maybe they receive personal care assistance or private duty nursing in the home. If you're a person with a disability who receives some kind of community supports to help you live in the community and you receive a termination notice, you should call us. We want to talk to you. We want to try to help you solve that problem. We can do everything from guiding you for the quick and easy solution if there's something quick and easy, reviewing your eligibility with you to make sure that you've looked at all the different doors and going through the specific criteria. And if we can, helping you to solve that problem by reaching out to the Division of Medical Assistance under a retainer in order to try to solve that problem and avoid the need to even go to a fair hearing. There are other organizations who are our friends in the advocacy community, Legal Services of New Jersey being one, and Community Health Law Project being the other. I cannot speak for them, but I do know that they are also preparing for the resumption of Medicaid eligibility and termination notices going out. All of us work in multiple languages, have access to interpreter services. So should you speak a language other than English or Spanish, or any language really, including American Sign Language, we can work with folks in any of those communities to make sure that you have access to legal help too. The contact information for these different organizations are up on the website, or I'm sorry, up in the screen, along with their websites. So feel free to take a look. I don't necessarily recommend, if you get a termination notice, calling all three of us. It probably makes sense to call one, request your fair hearing, and then, once your benefits are secure, settling on who's going to work with you to help you solve your problem, because we are prepared for there to be a significant number of people needing help. So we want to try to share that load without having one client call all three organizations. There's also, this possibility of bad news, is that, you might not actually be eligible under any of the Medicaid doors. Maybe you call Disability Rights New Jersey or Legal Services or Community Health Law Project, and we look through all the different eligibility doors with you, and it turns out that you're really not eligible, right? You've saved up far too much money. Maybe you're very wealthy now, and you no longer need a government program like Medicaid to help you pay for community services or health insurance plans. There's still some things you might do. We might refer people to attorneys to help do Medicaid planning. If you're under 65, you might be able to establish a special needs trust. Some people can purchase Medicaid annuities or exempt assets to bring their resources down under the financial limits. None of our organizations would typically provide that level of detailed advice, but we can get you into the hands of attorneys who could help you with that kind of a thing. If, despite all your efforts, you just don't have a way to become Medicaid eligible, or you don't want to move your assets around, you might be able to transition to other forms of health insurance through the exchanges. You may be eligible for one of those Medicare savings programs I mentioned on the doors slide. If you're on Medicare, those might help you pay some of your premiums and keep costs down. But you should know that if you change away from Medicaid eligibility and move towards a health insurance plan on the exchange through your employer, or if you move towards just Medicare only with a Medicare savings program, if you don't have Medicaid eligibility, you are going to lose waiver services. And waiver services in this world means Division of Developmental Disabilities, DDD, supports program, community care program, and the like. Just to wrap up, we're at the end of our substantive part of the presentation. It's worth reiterating. Make sure that Medicaid has your address correct, especially if you have moved during the pandemic. The phone number is 1-800-701-0710. There's a call center specifically set up to update people's address. That's all they're doing at that phone number. They're not doing any other business. They're just updating addresses. If you get mail from New Jersey Family Care, the state Medicaid office, Division of Medical Assistance and Health Services, your county board of social services, open it, read it. If you throw your mail in the trash, and what you threw in the trash was a Medicaid notice, you're going to miss your chance to save your benefits. You need to open all of your mail and read it. If you need help opening your mail and reading it, make sure you've got somebody in your support network who will check your mail for you and that they are reliably checking all of your mail. If you receive a termination notice, don't wait. File for a fair hearing. Do it right away. If you can do it in 10 days, great. Check the box. If you can do it in 20 days, great. Check the box anyway. Ask for continuation of benefits. Then call for legal help. If it turns out ultimately, after consulting with one of us, a lawyer, that you're ultimately not eligible for New Jersey Medicaid, we could talk about other options like Get Covered New Jersey or the health insurance exchanges, insurance through your employer, or a Medicare savings plan. Just know that those don't come with keys to the full Medicaid program, and therefore they do not come with access to the waiver supports or waiver community care program. If you need those programs, you need to keep Medicaid. All right, up on our screen once again is our full set of contact information, our web address, Facebook and Twitter, our phone number, which is toll free, and our 609-292-9742 is our non-toll-free number. Our toll-free number is 800-922-7233. If you call that number, you'll reach an intake specialist if you need our help. With that, we've ended our presentation. I think we're doing okay on time. I'm going to pass it back to our friends at the ARC of New Jersey to see if there's any questions.
Thank you so much, Michael and Kelly. This was an absolutely excellent presentation with lots and lots of people who have logged in to hear this presentation, which is terrific. And so I greatly appreciate the example that you used throughout your talk was in terms of being eligible for a different door, and used NJ workability, which is a very appropriate kind of example. I just wanted to mention one other thing for some people who may have a family member or a loved one who isn't in an NJ workability situation. But there's also the possibility of getting Medicaid through the DDD waiver unit. This is something that would not be available from the county offices because it's very specific to folks who have or are applying for DDD services. And the income maximum for this year through the DDD waiver unit is $2,742 a month. So that is significantly higher than any of the Medicaid categories, except for NJ workability. And it's important for people to know that that is another way to be getting Medicaid through the DDD waiver unit. We would hope that that would be recognized when somebody is getting the Medicaid redetermination application, and if they fill in income information that would make them ineligible for the category they used to have previously, but would make them eligible through the DDD waiver unit. We are hoping that that information will be communicated properly as one of the other eligible doors. However, since we don't know for certain that all the Medicaid office staff in the counties will know this, that's an example of something that potentially could result in a Medicaid termination notice, where you would again want to be filing for a fair hearing, but then reaching out for help, and that hopefully that's something that could be handled relatively easily. Okay, so we do have some questions, not a gigantic number of questions because you've done such a terrific job with your presentation, but I'm going to read some of the questions that we received for you to be able to answer. So the first question is with regard to that number, the phone number that you've mentioned several times, 800-701-0710. The question is, does this have the ability for Spanish language information?
That is a great question. And I believe the answer to that question is yes, that the state has the top. We had a meeting and they gave us the number of languages. And I want to say it was at least the top 12 most common languages spoken in New Jersey available. And there are federal requirements that every state's Medicaid program needs to be multilingual and accessible to anyone, even if they do not speak English. It's not a requirement to receive Medicaid services. So I believe the answer to that question is yes. And I would also say to somebody, if you call and you find that the call center does not speak your language, I would ask you to reach out to Disability Rights New Jersey or any of the advocacy organizations, but probably us first, and let us know that. If you call in and say, for example, you speak Mandarin and you call to the center and they don't speak Mandarin. If you call us, we have an interpreter service. We will work with you and understand that problem and get it fixed, because that's a systemic problem. That will affect everybody else in the state who speaks either your language or another language that's not English. So I would definitely like to hear about it if anyone in real world has a problem. I'll double check and actually send that piece of feedback back to the Medicaid director. It's a good point.
Great, excellent, thank you. So another question, the letter that you've used, the example for people that would get a termination notice, the question is, since this letter seems rather general, do they have to tell you why exactly they no longer feel that you are clinically eligible for Medicaid?
Yes. So the requirement for that notice, the explanation does not need to be greatly detailed, but there needs to be enough information on a termination notice to let you know why you're no longer eligible. It could be something as simple as, Bev, I'll use the income limit or the asset limit that you mentioned for the DDD special programs limit. It's $2,731, I believe.
This $2,742 this year.
42, thank you. If you had $3,000 in a bank account, and that happens to be when Medicaid reviews your assets, and they realize that you're no longer financially eligible, if they thought you were not eligible for any program, they would send you a termination notice that said, you're no longer financially eligible for Medicaid because you have too many resources. We believe you have $3,000 in the bank. The limit is $2,741, right? This is the kind of level of detail they would need to give you to explain why the state believes you're no longer eligible. Enough for you to figure out, did they make a mistake? Do I actually have $3,000 in the bank, or was that just an error on their part? Did they look at a incorrect bank statement, or maybe it's a joint account and some of that money is somebody else's? So the notice needs to explain with enough detail for you to make a decision, do I disagree or not? And therefore, right, to also make a decision, do I need to file an appeal if I disagree? Now, if you get the notice and it says you have $2.5 million in the bank and you say, yep, I won the lottery last year, so I'm all good. I don't even need Medicaid anymore. You might decide not to appeal, right? But if you think there's an error, there should be enough information there for you to file an appeal. If you get a termination notice and there's not enough information for you to make a decision, my suggestion is request the fair hearing, request continuation of benefits, You can always withdraw it. If you change your mind later after you learn something else about your case, you can always say, never mind, I don't want to appeal anymore, and cancel that appeal. You can do that at any time.
That's a very, very good point. So I'm going to ask a question. It's not one that was typed in, but my question is, in terms of an example, like somebody has $3,000 in resources. They're not allowed to have more than 2,000, but with an ABLE account, they could be depositing up to $17,000 a year. So if it's somebody that just didn't know about ABLE accounts, as an example, and they're just a bit over in their resources, what would happen, since if they knew, they could just open an ABLE account and transfer some money in? What would happen in a case like that?
So there's really probably two answers to a question like that. One is the practical, and one is the strict by the letter of the law. Practically speaking, if somebody was just a few dollars over on an asset, and was able to address that, right? Maybe they just hadn't paid their rent yet that month, and a little bit of money had piled up in the bank, or maybe they were planning on making a deposit to an ABLE account and just hadn't gotten, the account opened in time, and then went ahead and did it and got themselves back under the resource limit. Technically speaking, that person was not eligible for a period of time and could have their eligibility restored. Practically speaking, and this is why folks should reach out to an attorney, because case by case, we'd want to talk and see what we could figure out. In some cases, you might be able to resolve that and get uninterrupted Medicaid coverage, even if you were technically over the limits on a resource or income. The other thing is that even if you were over the resources for one program, doesn't mean you're over the resources for all programs. So it may be that even if you didn't make that deposit to an ABLE account, depending what your situation is, you might be eligible through a different door. It's why it's so important to consult with an attorney if you're not sure how to handle your own case, or even if you just want to double check, even if you feel very confident you know how to handle it, even if you just want to double check, it's so important to consult with a lawyer who can talk to you one-on-one in a confidential setting without worrying about that information coming out or being public or shared with anybody else, and give you some, at the bare minimum, legal advice about your eligibility.
Terrific, thank you. So the next question, what happens if the letter is dated, but the person receives it beyond the 10 days of when you should be requesting the continuation of benefits? So it's not the fault of the recipient, it's either the fault of the Postal Service, or the letter was dated from the Medicaid office but never actually got into the mail on the date of what it says in that notice.
Request the fair hearing anyway. It would be my answer. Michael, do you want to chime in?
Absolutely, 100% agree. Request a fair hearing anyway. Better yet, request a fair hearing anyway. Use that handout. One of the reasons that Kelly put the extra options at the top about how did I find out and when did I find out. If you didn't get your notice in the mail because, say, the Postal Service works slower than it used to, if you don't get it till after your deadline has passed, first off, still request your fair hearing. Second off, you might be able to use our form and document. I didn't get my notice until 2 or 3 days after the deadline, or a week after the deadline, or a month after the deadline, whenever you received it. There is a provision in the law that Medicaid can, for good cause, still give you continuation of benefits even if you miss a particular deadline. A delay in the mail where you had no idea that your Medicaid coverage was going to be terminated might be a basis for that kind of good cause. Not a slam dunk, not a guarantee, but if you request a fair hearing right away, waste no time once you know, and request it and explain that you received that notice late. Again, we provided a form letter so you don't have to create something from whole cloth. That's your best course of action. And then guess what my next course of action would be? Pick up the phone, call one of the organizations that I mentioned here, ask for assistance to try to resolve that problem.
Excellent advice. Thank you. Another question, will Medicaid continuation letters be sent to those who were recently reviewed and told they're staying on Medicaid?
Yes. This is a process that before the pandemic happened all the time, right? People became eligible for Medicaid and on an annual basis would be reviewed. Now, if they received Medicaid because they got SSI, they might not have had to do much interaction with the state Medicaid agency. They might have just kept their Medicaid and not even realize that they were getting redetermined every year. That's going to resume, right? Just the fact that the public health emergency is coming to an end just means that that hasn't happened for several years, but now it's going to resume normally. So if you had your eligibility redetermined during the pandemic and you're found to still be eligible and your situation hasn't really changed, you still get SSI, or you still have a very low income that falls under the poverty line, and you have very few assets, less than $100 in the bank, you never had more than that. If your financial situation hasn't changed, you're probably okay. And you might not get a termination notice. You're probably still going to get a redetermination request, though, which you still have to get in the mail and respond to in a timely fashion in order to get the information Medicaid needs to make sure that you're still eligible for Medicaid. It's not going to happen all at once. So if you got yours, at the end of the year last year in 2022, you might not get your next redetermination until about the same time this year in 2023. You'll have to check your mail. You still have to keep an eye out. This is going to be something that's relevant, going forward. As long as you need Medicaid, you're going to have to watch out for these. This just happens to be something we weren't used to for the last 3 years.
Excellent point. Next question. The letter for the redetermination. If we have somebody that's the recipient of Medicaid, and there's a legal guardian, and there's a rep payee who might be different from the legal guardian, will the letters come to just one of those people or to all three, or how would you know who it is that's going to get the letter?
So yeah, that can be a tricky situation, Bev. And I think that the thing I would tell people about that, and not to, again, be a broken record, is to call into the Medicaid office, the hotline that we've posted and shared here. I'll put that back up on the screen in just a second. And check to make sure that the address that they have on file is accurate. So if you need your mail to be going to your guardian, you can make sure that guardian is getting copies of your mail. If your rep payee, I don't think your rep payee would automatically get Medicaid notices because the rep payee handles your Social Security benefits. But I believe that if you want to, I do not know the rules about designating a second address, but at the bare minimum, you want to make sure that your address is on file, and if your guardian is to receive mail, that they're on file. And I'm just putting this phone number back up on the screen. This is the handout from the New Jersey Medicaid office, also known as New Jersey Family Care. So people have that phone number back up on the screen. Make sure they've got a good mailing address. So wherever the mail goes, you or your guardian, or if you have an assistant, someone like a rep payee who helps you with that kind of thing, that they know where to be checking the mail.
Excellent. Here's a question. Does your Medicaid provider, meaning the MCO, also get notified of a Medicaid termination action, or does the beneficiary have to tell them?
So the managed care organizations are actually playing a role in this unwinding process and the redetermination process. We've heard from the state Medicaid office that they've set up a mailing system so that the managed care orgs will actually send a postcard out to people to let them know, hey, you're due to be redetermined in May or June or July or August, or right, one of these months, you are in particular going to be up for redetermination. So watch your mail. So the managed care orgs will be doing some reminders here too, so folks would watch for those postcards. And the managed care orgs, if somebody's ultimately found to be ineligible and might be facing termination, they get notified on the back end from the Medicaid office. But the most important notice to watch out for is the one that comes to you, because telling your managed care organization or your care manager or even your support coordinator, hey, I want to appeal this. Kelly said this, I think, right? Like telling somebody I want to appeal isn't enough. You've got to submit that request for a fair hearing in writing, some form or fashion. We've gone through that already. So your Medicaid MCO will find out. They might tell you even over the phone, hey, we see that you have a termination and maybe you've never gotten a letter and you need to use our form to request that fair hearing. But telling them I need a fair hearing won't be enough to do it. So there's no obligation for a beneficiary of Medicaid to tell their MCO, hey, I'm losing my Medicaid. They'll find out on the back end because they're the ones who get paid to administer your benefit.
Right, excellent. I don't know that you know the answer to this question, but I'm going to read the question anyway. Will they be requesting annual information, or will they go back for 2 or 3 years with these redeterminations?
This is one of those answers where the answer is that depends. Depends on what kind of Medicaid eligibility you have. It depends on what door you currently were going through. It depends on what doors either county or the Medicaid office are reviewing for you. That depends. If there are requests for information to you, they should come out before you even get a termination notice. And my initial advice would be take a look at what's there, and if you can, get that information back to either the county or the Medicaid office, whether it's 1 year, 3 years, what have you. There's been some conversations, so we don't know the final answer on are certain years going to be completely ignored, or will information be waived? We don't know. But to be safe, if you're asked for information from the Medicaid office, provide that information to the Medicaid office as part of the redetermination process to avoid getting a termination notice just for not answering.
Excellent. If somebody has mistakenly thrown out the mail with the redetermination application, is there a way to check to see if a notice may have been sent out to them?
Ooh, that's a really good question, Bev. And actually, maybe you know some of this because it's a question I was thinking about the medical assistance customer centers, the MACCs. I'm wondering if they might have that information, but I don't know that for sure.
Good, it's a good point. I don't know either, but it can't hurt to check with the MACCs. Those are the medical assistance customer centers. And actually, we have information. I know it wasn't included in your slides. I have all of those, the MAC addresses and phone numbers. Anybody who wants to email me, I can send it out. It can also, you can just Google it, Medical Assistance Customer Centers in New Jersey, and that should pop up. But if anybody wants to email me for that list, my address is broberts@arcnj.org.
I'm going to say one more thing about that, Bev, is that I would not, even if the customer centers are willing to give some information about whether a notice has been issued or not, I would not count on that if I was a Medicaid beneficiary. I would want to make sure that I or somebody who was helping me was like a hawk on top of my mail to look at every single thing that came in and not throwing anything out before reading it, especially in this next year, because the deadlines are so tight that by the time you notice, hey, gee, I haven't gotten anything in the mail, I'm wondering if I was supposed to redetermined or not. You may have missed something, or if you're not scheduled to be redetermined until say December or even February of 2024, this 12-month period is running from April to April, so it's going to cross into 2024. If you're not scheduled ahead of time, trying to check on that is going to be pretty tricky because they may not know. You might get an answer that confuses you. My default is watch your mail. That is the legally required way for the state to communicate with you about this kind of a thing.
Yeah, I think, we're doing so much information right now to get the word out, which is really good. But there are some people, as you're saying, they're probably not going to end up, some people, since it's 1/12 each month, some people are not going to actually get the redetermination application until later this year, beginning of next year, through March of 2024. So I know that there's just so much attention right now, which is good, but people just need to remember it's only 1/12 of the people who are going to get this redetermination application who will actually get it in April of 2023. So there's a question here, will Medicaid through SSI, if you have SSI and that's why you have Medicaid, will they be reviewed and have letters sent for a redetermination?
So my understanding of that question is that no, if you are on SSI and you still have SSI, that check is done in the background, that it does not necessarily involve you submitting any information because the Social Security Administration already has all of your financial information necessary, and the state of New Jersey doesn't need to do any other checks. They know that you're already eligible for SSI because the federal government tells them so. I don't believe that those folks will get affirmative outreach.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, that's it. The SSI Medicaid comes as a package. And as families know, you did an application for your loved one to get SSI. You didn't do a Medicaid application back then. It was an SSI application. When that got approved, Medicaid came along with it. So that's a bundle that comes together, goes away together if it does go away at some point. So my understanding is that those folks will not get a redetermination from New Jersey. However, just to be aware, there are some SSI redeterminations that could be done at any time. So the answer is anyone who gets a request for information from Social Security or from New Jersey Medicaid, you need to open it in a timely way and respond timely. If you had Medicaid before the pandemic and nothing has changed, should we assume we will continue to be eligible?
I think generally, as a general rule, if nothing has changed, you're probably okay. There's a couple of things to watch out for, even if nothing else has changed. If you got, and this is getting a little bit into the weeds, but it's worth mentioning, if you were on Affordable Care Act Medicaid or Obamacare or expansion, right, 3 different names, all the same thing, you would have signed up through the exchanges or got on through your county before the pandemic. And if you turn 65, that's one of those things where nothing else about your situation may have changed. Your disability is the same as it was before. Your finances are exactly the same as they were before, but now you're just 66 years old because your birthday happened during the pandemic, or several birthdays at this point. That is one eligibility door that is age dependent. You can't be over the age of 65 and receiving Affordable Care Act Medicaid. So you might have to change to a different door. Other than that, generally speaking, if you had SSI before, you still have SSI, you're probably okay. If you're on aged, blind, and disabled Medicaid or ABD Medicaid and haven't piled up any resources, you still have very few dollars in the bank and your income hasn't changed, you're probably still okay. You're still gonna have to respond to your mail because you're still going to go through the redetermination process. Again, if you're on SSI, you might not get any mail that asks you for any information because they have everything they need. But otherwise, you're probably going to be okay. I really don't want to start, there's no reason for panic here. Just look at your mail. If you throw the notice in the trash and don't respond, even if you're still eligible, you might have created a problem for yourself by not responding. So you want to keep your eye on those kind of things. That's why we're saying this now.
Absolutely, yes. So if your Medicaid eligibility is not terminated in the next 12 months, is there a notice sent out by New Jersey Family Care that will confirm that you are still eligible?
So it will look pretty similar to how things looked before the pandemic. If you had an annual redetermination and you had to submit some paperwork, whether it was to your county or the state Medicaid office to update things like your income or your bank account information or resources, things like that. The correspondence is going to look pretty similar. That might result in a notice that says you are still eligible for Medicaid. Or if you're on SSI, you might just hear nothing and your Medicaid will just continue quietly in the background. So it will look very similar to how it looked before the pandemic. I'm not sure whether there's going to be some kind of a closure, like, hey, we've gotten through this 12 months and everyone who's still on, you're all good, because those redeterminations are going to keep on rolling. Once April comes, it's not like those are over. It's going to keep continuing just like it did before the pandemic, right? Everybody gets reviewed once a year for eligibility at the minimum.
Yes, okay, so I know when I originally said there weren't too many questions, and right after I said that, after you finished your presentation, lots of questions got typed in. So we don't have time to go through all of them. So I want to this is the last question that that we will have time for today. If you are on Medicaid through the DDD waiver unit, will you still be notified in the same way for a Medicaid redetermination?
So yeah, if you've been on it since before the pandemic and you've been redetermined before, That process is also going to come from the state and going to be pretty similar to how it was before. Again, we don't know exactly what those notices are going to look like, but we have a pretty good idea that they're going to be, you know, small modifications from what they looked like before the pandemic compared to what they look like now. And yeah, that's a program that does require a level of redetermination. So you should expect that you get communications, you know, from the waiver unit or from the state Medicaid office on redetermination when it's your turn.
Okay, thank you so much. And there was also a question about where the slides, the recording from today's webinar and the slides will be posted. So my website address is www.mainstreamingmedicalcare.org. I'm also going to make sure that DRNJ has the slides and this recording that they can post on their website. And I greatly appreciate the presentation that was done today. Michael Brower, Kelly McGuire, thank you so much. This was a very, very helpful webinar. And here at the ARC of New Jersey, we will continue to provide information as we receive it. There's a lot that we know now. There are certain things we don't yet know. And so as new information becomes available about Medicaid renewals and Medicaid redeterminations, we will be glad to share it. Thank you all for joining us today. Bye.